One thing I do want to recognize, or one person, is the first author here, T.L. Devine. That's Tom Devine. Tom's in the back of the room, and Tom's working on a master's there in the Department of Animal Science. And so this is actually his research data for his master's program. And he'll be finishing up sometime this summer, and Tom is looking for gainful employment. So if you have an opportunity for Tom, please let me know or Tom know. So, but anyway, and Tom's back in the back of the room, so when you have questions that I can't answer, maybe one of us can answer that. So let me back up here. We're going to talk about growth and reproduction in replacement heifers. If you've had the opportunity to buy replacement heifers lately, or if you've had the opportunity to at least attempt to buy replacement heifers, you know that they're extremely expensive. And we were just talking about this at lunch. It's high risk, at least in my mind, it's high risk. If you're going to spend $1,500, $1,800, $2,000 for a heifer, how long do you need to keep her? To me, we were joking that she probably needs to have twins each and every year for the remainder of her life to actually recoup some of that initial cost. And so, as we started looking at research projects that we thought were going to be applicable to stakeholders in this state, one of the things that we wanted to do is look at how can we take maybe those low-end heifers, those low-weight heifers that we all have, and can we increase value? Can we increase value, one, from a standpoint of growth? More pounds means more for our check at the end of the day if we take them to the sale barn, but also as replacement heifers. And when we think about replacement heifers, a lot of times it's a little taboo to think about growth implants and reproduction in our replacement heifers. And so we've shed some light on that, and we want to share that with you and let you make up your mind. We're not by any means, I want to first say, first and foremost, always read the label, the recommended label for implants. We're not here to say that you should do something that is off-label. We're going to show you what we did, and in research purposes, we did some off-label implanting, and we'll show you what that did to the reproductive performance of these heifers. So replacement heifers, we all know that proper development of those replacement heifers is essential to maintain the profitability of the cow herd. We're trying to rebuild the cow herd at the local level, at the U.S. level, and to do that, those animals are going to replace those old aged cows that are low producing. I sold yesterday, Monday in Fort Smith, I sold a 13-year-old cow. I went back and looked, and she was between 13 and 14 years of age, and she just lost a calf. And so need replacement heifers. Need what? Replacement heifers at a 16% cull rate, 20% cull rate of your cow herd every year. What is that number for you specifically? But again, thinking about these replacement heifers should be replacing some of that some of those old cows, some of those underperforming cows, and we should be replacing it with better genetics than what we previously had. Dr. Harlan Hughes has been around for many years. He's emeritus extension economist from North Dakota State University. And he has a market advisor. It's a column in Beef Magazine. A few years ago, if you remember, Dr. Hughes said replacement heifers, basically to recapture that cost of replacement heifers, it took the net profit of 6 calves. He's changed that now, and so just in 2013, he did a cash flow analysis on a 250 cow study. He was looking at this in the modeling form, looking at the inputs, the outputs of this 250 cow herd, and he basically summarized that the total economic cost of developing replacement heifers in this 250 cow study, this cash flow analysis, came to about $1,450 per replacement heifer. And his comment at the last part of that article was, this number has really increased in recent years. And everyone in this room that's in the cattle industry, cattle business, trying to buy some of those replacement heifers would echo and say amen to this last part. This number has really increased in the last few years. So there's 3 alternatives to rebuilding the cow herd. We know these. You can retain heifers from your own herd. Who's doing that right now? Anybody keeping heifers back? Most everybody is right now. You can buy heifers, either bred. We've got one person buying those heifers, either bred or open. And you can buy cows. Talking to Tom Troxel at lunch, buying those cows may be the most economically feasible thing to do. And often you either breed them as a 3-in-1, and I can assure you that you can't buy cow-calf pairs right now. Anybody try to buy a cow-calf pair? They'll split 200-pound calves off right now, left and right. 150-pound, 200-pound calves, they will split them off, sell that calf for $2.80, $3 a pound, whatever it is. It's very rare that you're going to be able to buy a cow-calf pair right now. So there's advantages and disadvantages to either retaining or buying these. If you retain your own, the advantages, obviously, is you know what you're getting. You know the genetics, right? Ideally, you should. If it's good genetics, you have that ability or that capability of passing on those genetic decisions that you've made, hopefully in a conscious effort to increase the genetic pool in your herd. What about that price? That's the opportunity cost that you're not taking those heifers to the sale barn, and if you're going in a cash flow system and you need that money to pay the land payment or pay the cow payment, the advantage is going to be that you are going to have that price of retaining your own is going to be back over here on this other side, and you're not going to have that. If you're going to retain your own, you're obviously not selling that animal. Disadvantages of retaining your own, maybe you don't have those superior genetics. Foregoing those current sales, basically what I was talking about here on the price. You're not getting that cash flow. Additional management. Basically, you keep a weaned heifer today. How long is it going to be till she has a calf for you? You wean her at 210 days, 250 days. You're going to breed her. She's going to take 9 months. It's a long time, right? It's a long time for that additional management required to develop that heifer. You're going to buy them. Maybe you can buy that genetics that you're looking for. Save time and trouble managing. Let someone else do that managing for you. Obviously, the disadvantages here, as we've talked about, is the price, the source. Can you find heifers right now? Can you find the kind of heifers that you want right now? I'm a reproductive physiologist, so I always put this slide in, and I think it is important. Reproduction is the most economically important trait. I've got a question mark there. Traits associated with reproduction are about 5 times more economically valuable than calf growth or milk production of a cow. Reproduction is the lifeblood, correct? It's a lifeblood. Obviously, it's supported. You have to feed those animals correctly. But reproduction, an open cow, an open cow, an open cow cost money, money, money. So, traits associated with reproduction, 5 times more economically valuable. Genetics account for less than 10% of the variation in reproduction. It's hard to make those genetic or those reproduction decisions and try to make sure you're getting that heritability back in the herd. This cow's always calved, this cow's always calved. Genetics accounts for less than 10% of the variation in reproduction. Here's an interesting point at the bottom. Just a 5% increase in a 100 cow herd. Basically, your total expenses are going to remain the same. Whether you're getting 85% calf crop and 90% calf crop, total expenses are going to remain relatively the same. 5% increase in the calf crop, you're going to have that same or that actually elevated production with 5 fewer cows. So just bumping it just a little bit in terms of reproduction, increasing that percentage calf crop makes a big difference. We all know this, but do we practice it? Replacement heifers should calve as 2-year-olds to maximize their lifetime productivity. Research back in the 70s indicates that this is crucial. Calves, they should calve at 2 years. Replacement heifers at 2 years will maximize their lifetime productivity. To do this, they have to reach puberty at an early age. Remember that first estrus cycle is very likely not a fertile cycle, correct? So once you see them out mounting one another, that kind of thing, and they're just coming into estrus or just beginning to cycle, that first cycle is likely not to be the most fertile cycle. Conceive earlier in that breeding season ideally means they would calve early and produce heavier calves at weaning, especially if you have that single date of weaning. You have that October 1 deadline if you're spring calving, fall weaning. So weight is a major factor. We've talked about this forever. 2/3 of the mature cow body weight of her mom, of her dam, that's when she should be starting to cycle, when she should start to see reach puberty. Heifers fail to reach this puberty when they get below that threshold. There's some interesting work out of the University of Nebraska now that indicates we can get by with 55 to 58% of the mature body weight. Those heifers may be reaching puberty, maybe 5 to 7% less than what we originally thought. So what does that mean? The who cares factor there means that we're not putting those input costs of 5 to 7% more into that animal, and we may be getting the same result. So there's a lot of work that's being looked at over the last 5 to 7 years out of the University of Nebraska. So, growth promoting implants. Paul Beck talked about growth promoting implants this morning, more from a finishing side of things, more from the growth part. Growth implants have been used for over 30 years in beef production. Depending on the studies, you can look at different implant strategies, a really aggressive strategy, a less aggressive strategy, those impacts on growth, those impacts on carcass traits. Been around for many, many, many years. They improve average daily gain in suckling beef calves by 4 to 8%, growing calves by 10 to 12%, and finishing cattle by 15%. Those numbers are pretty much uniform across the board. Any publications you look at, go and look in the Journal of Animal Science, any of those technical reports, you'll see those numbers. Implants also increase feed efficiency. Also increase the feed efficiency of that animal, 6 to 8% in growing cattle and up to 8 to 10% in our finishing cattle. So, average daily gain, product of that animal being more efficient. So various growth promoting implants are used. And when we start to think about heifers, we start to think about implanting those animals when they're young. Not when they're really young, not a month or less of age, but when they're young. And those growth implants obviously will increase gain, but there are a few that are recommended for replacement heifers due to the fact that there's a possibility, there's a really good possibility, that there could be some detrimental effects on fertility and subsequent productivity. Let's think about this a minute. Has anyone ever Googled growth promoting implants? Go Google growth promoting implants, and what you'll find is a lot of the bodybuilders, the weightlifter guys and gals, they're actually using, this is insane, but they're actually using some of these implants that we're using for cattle. They're crushing them up. Have you seen that? It's insanity. But they will go through and they're using some Finaplex and things like that. And but think about what happens to those bodybuilders. What happens to them? They bulk up a lot, correct? What happens with reproduction? They go sterile. So you're adding a lot of a exogenous, something that's outside the system, into the body. You're flooding the system. The internal system shuts down. There's still that exposure day after day after day of steroids. And it shuts down. It causes a demise of the reproductive system, mainly in males. We talked about atrophy of the reproductive system. They go sterile. So that's our concern when we start thinking about replacement heifers and reproduction. Do we care if a steer is sterile? He already is, right? We don't care about that. But we do care about that with replacement heifers if we're thinking about keeping them. So with the national cow herd size at its lowest since 1950, our interest obviously in Tom's research project here was, can we add value? Can we give producers options? Again, by no means are we recommending going off-label, but can we give you, me, as cow-calf producers in this state, options for some of those low-weight heifers or for heifers in general, for replacement heifers? And it may be something we want to consider when we're thinking about heifers for possible replacements. So, Tom set out to do this research project, and our objective was to determine the influence of these growth-promoting implants on the growth of the heifer, the reproductive development of that heifer, estrus behavior, so actually how she behaved when she was coming into estrus, number of mounts, those kind of things, and ultimately the pregnancy rate of those heifers. And I'll show, I don't want to say it yet. The heifers are back over here now. I'm going to say it. The heifers are back over here and they're calving out. So we have the proof in the pudding on some of these. So we took those white Charolais times or Charolais by balancer heifers that James was talking about that came from this station, and they were transported to the North Farm at the Fayetteville Research Station. 65 heifers. They were 255 days of age when they started the study. They were almost 400 pounds. So remember, our objective was to add value to low-weight heifers. So these are weaned heifers. They weighed 395, 400 pounds. So they were low. 4.5 body condition score, and they were 43 inches tall at the hip. Again, we were trying to capture long bone growth. We were looking at the weight. We were looking at the condition score, the body fat, and also that hip height there. We had 4 different treatment groups, and we had about 15 to 17 animals in each treatment group. So divide 65 by 4. We had a control group. They received no implant. We had a second group that received TBA, or Trenbolone acetate. And I'll give you some more information on this. This is commercially available as component TH with Tylen. So it has 200 milligrams of Trenbolone acetate. A second component TEG, that's Trenbolone acetate with estradiol. And then finally we had Ralgro or Zeranol. All right, so 4 treatments: control, Trenbolone acetate with estradiol, and then with estradiol alone, which is under the commercial name Zeranol. I'm not going to make you endocrinologist, but I want to give you just a little bit of background. The TBA is an androgen. These are all synthetics. So it's a synthetic androgen. So the Trenbolone acetate works directly on the muscle cells. There's basically 2 types of implants. You either have a steroid or an androgen, or you have an estrogen. All right? So if we think back to, how many have seen all the commercials on, do you have low T? Anybody seen that? So what happens as a male, what happens to our testosterone as we age? It goes down, right? Does it really go down, or is it just being changed? As we get fatter, what happens? Aromatase, there's an enzyme there that breaks our testosterone down to an estrogen. So actually, as we get older, we have, if they were to take a blood sample of us right now, me, as you're getting older, if I was 15 years of age, 30 years of age, 45 years of age, things like that, as I got older and better body condition, I would have, my ratio would have larger or increased concentrations of estradiol or estrogen and lower concentrations of testosterone. So sidebar, what does that do to our prostate? Bad news, right? That's why males, as we get older, so our testosterone goes down and our prostate goes up, right? That's the steroids that are involved in us, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about our cattle, when we talk about exposing them to different hormones. So TBA is an androgen. Zeranol is an estrogen. So estrogen actually works on the brain. It goes in there and works on the pituitary gland, growth hormone. So it's going to increase the pituitary gland, increase concentrations of growth hormone. All right? So you've got an estrogen, you've got an androgen, and then you've got the combination of both. So we had the best of both worlds. We had each type of implant plus a combination of both of those. All right? Food safety concerns. I threw this slide in yesterday. I thought, well, someone's going to say, oh my gosh, all these steroids and all the meat and all this kind of stuff. This was adapted from Preston in 1997. This looks at the estrogenic activity of just some common foods. So if you look at soybean oil, 908,000 nanograms per pound of food, all the way down to beef from a pregnant cow, beef from an implanted cow, beef from a non-implanted cow. So we get down here and we're at 636 from a pregnant cow. So guess what? She's going to have steroids, correct? She's going to have progesterone. She's going to have estrogen. She's at 636. You can look at eggs, 16,000. Look at cabbage, almost 11,000 nanograms. Men on a daily basis produce about 100,000. Women produce, guess what? 50 times more than men per day. 50 times more. Coming from the ovary, right? Cows, any female. So this is, if you look at this, the nanograms per mil of an implanted beef animal is of little consequence. It's minimal. Especially when we start to think about the other things, peas, wheat germ, cabbage, all the other things that we consume. Heifers were implanted on day 0. We took our body weights at 0, 106, 195, and 220. And we also went through and did a reproductive tract score. Everybody know what a reproductive tract score is? You're going in and palpate reproductive tract. And so we went through and did that at day 106 and 195. And it's a scale of 1 to 5. It's a well-established scale of 1 to 5. We did something a little bit different. We put scores of 1, 2, and 3 as being non-cyclic, and 4 and 5 as being cyclic. All right, so we did reproductive tract scores, and give you a little bit more information here. Reproductive tract scores can be used as a culling tool. Can be, help the producer, help us make a decision whether this animal should be maintained in the herd or let somebody else manage that animal. And so we assign those scores. The reproductive tract score should be performed about 1 month or less before the breeding season if you're going to use that as a culling tool. All right? So here gives you a little bit more background. An RTS1, or reproductive tract score 1, that animal is the furthest from cycling. She's way out there. She has an infantile tract, small toneless uterine horns. 2, she's getting a little closer, slightly larger uterine horns and small follicles. 3, she's on the verge. So in this study, we looked at 1, 2, and 3, and we said, we're going to categorize those heifers as non-cyclic. They're not going to cycle. 4 and 5. 4 is presumably she's going to cycle if she's not already, but she lacks a corpus luteum, a CL. You've heard that word before. CL is producing progesterone, progestation. That's the hormone for pregnancy. So 4, she lacks a corpus luteum, but she's going to cycle. And 5 is she has a CL, she's cycling, or she has just recently cycled. So we use 1, 2, and 3 as non-cycling, 4 and 5 as they were cycling. We went through and synchronized estrus, and you talk to 10 different people, and you'll probably get at least 8 different synchronization protocols. So this is what Dr. Rick Rory in the department was using. So this is what we used. We exposed them to progesterone for 16 days, gave them GnRH, Lutalice, and then we went through and bred on heat watch estrus. This is a picture of the heifers with their orange tags. You put white heifers with orange tags on their tail heads on Dean Street in Fayetteville, and guess what happens? You get lots of phone calls. You get lots of phone calls from people that say, what the heck's wrong with those heifers out there with orange tails? And so we have to explain, at least our research is being recognized, right? At least it's being recognized. But these heifers stayed out there, what we call the Dean Street Farm, the dairy, if you've been there. But we monitored their estrus behavior via a heat watch system. And I'm sure you're familiar with the heat watch system. Basically, this is measures, monitors. Every time that little button is depressed, it's going to go through and be recorded on a computer, basically a log, a data log. So we had a lot of data. Heifers were AI'd at 10 to 19 hours, according to heat watch, according to the estrus that was identified on heat watch. And then we exposed them to bulls after AIs for about 30 days, about 28 days. And so here's a picture of a conceptus as we go through an ultrasound. We ultrasounded them at 278 days and 299 days. So Rick Rory, Dr. Rory came out and ultrasounded to distinguish between a AI conception and a natural service conception. So either they were bred to the AI or they were bred to the bull. So here's the little baby as it's growing. So we wanted to look at, again, that growth part of it. So we looked at changes in body weight, body condition score, and hip height. And that was for the 220 days that those heifers were at the North Farm grazing. These heifers were all treated the same. They all moved as one group around the farm there grazing. And so what we basically saw is in body weight, again, this is control. This is TBA. Remember, TBA is an androgen, or like testosterone, if you think about testosterone. So those heifers that received testosterone or an androgen plus an estrogen, they gained the most weight. Over that time period, they gained 384 pounds during their 220 days, and that was different than all other treatments. So those heifers that received the androgen plus the estrogen implant were greatest in body weight. Body condition score increased about 0.6 to 0.8. Body condition score units, there were no difference across treatments. Hip heights, we didn't see any of that bone growth, as in terms of our hip height. There was no difference in hip height, no difference in body condition, but heifers that were given both the androgen and the estrogen implant had an increase in body weight. So if we look at average daily gain, we're obviously going to see that average daily gain was different. The green bars are when we looked at body weight on day 106. So they were all treated the same for 106 days, all the way to 220 days. And so when we looked at that, here's the heifers that received trenbolone acetate plus estrogen. At day 106, they were gaining a little over 2.25 pounds per day. So when we start to think back of implants and things like that in terms of increased efficiency, increased average daily gain, you can see here about 2 pounds for our control, about 2.1, 2.08 for the trenbolone acetate, 2.25, almost 3, and then right at 2. So there was differences at day 106. Those heifers were heavier. And if we look at the 220 date, there in the red bar, we saw that same pattern follow. So those heifers that were given the implant with both an estrogen and an androgen were increased weight, had increased average daily gain. Remember, we did reproductive tract scores. 1, 2, and 3 was non-cyclic, 4 and 5 was cyclic. We start to look at those heifers that were receiving estrogens, the old Rowgrow implant, Zeranol. Those heifers at day 106, when Dr. Rory went in there and did a reproductive tract score on them, there was less heifers that were in that scoring of 4 or 5. So heifers that are exposed to estrogen, again, we only implanted these heifers one time, only once. At day 106, there was actually fewer heifers that were considered cyclic because the blue bars are indicative of cyclic. So that would be a heifer that got a reproductive tract score of 4 or 5. So exposure to estrogen evidently is causing a problem with that reproductive tract score. And again, think back to the bodybuilders, think back to the exposure over and over and over again of that estrogen. The estrogen is obviously causing something early on. It's interesting that Zeranol is the only implant here that we used that is labeled for replacement heifers. The others are labeled for feed yard heifers. Okay? But Zeranol can only be given 1 month of age up to weaning. We did a reproductive tract score at day 195. That reproductive tract score difference went away. So we did it at 106 and we saw a difference with Zeranol. There was less of those heifers that were cycling. When we start to look at day 195, so about another 3 months, there was no difference in the number of heifers that were categorized as either cycling or non-cycling. So that detrimental effect, evidently those heifers grew out of that, if you will, or were able to overcome that. And maybe it was just the exposure of the estrogens wasn't strong enough over a long period of time. Estrus behavior. Remember, we had heat watch patches on these heifers and we were able to monitor everything they did. Reams and reams of data. So we looked at duration of estrus. Duration of estrus, depending on what data set you look at, should be 18 to 30 hours. It can range from 2 to 36 hours or so. But duration of estrus for these heifers, again, if we synchronize them, we alter estrus behavior. But roughly between 10 and 12 hours. So those heifers were in estrus for about 10 to 12 hours. There were no differences in that length of estrus by treatment. So whether we gave them an androgen or an estrogen or both, that did not affect duration of estrus. Now when we look at mounts, so remember these are the heifers, they've got the heat watch patch on them and they're being mounted. The heifers that received trenbolone acetate, so that's a testosterone or an androgen, they received almost double the number of mounts. It's almost double the number of mounts. I will show you this, there was 41 heifers. We started out with 65, and so we had data on 41 heifers. That's one caveat of this study is we're just sharing with you our research that we've completed with the Batesville station in Fayetteville, and our numbers are relatively small, about 15, remember 15 to 17 per treatment group. But our mounts were greater in those heifers that received the androgen. Quiescence is that period where cattle are just standing around. They're not doing anything. They're not mounting one another, they're just standing there, and so we go through and calculate the quiescence in hours, and there was no difference in animals that were. We use this variable a lot in quiescence when we talk about heat stress. When heifers or cattle are out under a shade tree, and there'll be a long period of quiescence when it's 105 degrees. They don't want to mount one another. They don't want to be mounted. They don't want to have anything to do but to stand there and suffer through till it gets cool at night. So, but there was no difference in this quiescence period. One thing we saw is there was an increase in the number of mounts in those heifers that received the trenbolone acetate or that androgen implant. Pregnancy rate. Caution you, we had 15 to 17 animals per treatment group, so our numbers are relatively small. But you start to look across the board here, the blue bars are the number of animals that were pregnant. You can see control was about 82%. If we look at all three implant groups, they're right around 62 to 65, 66% pregnancy rate. When we do our statistical analysis and look at treatment means, there was no difference across all treatments in regards to pregnancy rate. There was no difference. But again, you can see it, I can see it. There's about what? About a 20% increase from control versus these three here. Our mean pregnancy rate was 72%. Across all four treatment groups, our mean was 72%, and our means did not differ when we start to do our statistical analyses. Numerically, that looks like to me it's about 82. The rest of these could be about somewhere in the ballpark of 62. So about 20% pregnancy rate difference. That's real if it's your animals, right? It's real if it's your animals or if it's my animals. But we saw no difference in our pregnancy rates. So we shipped those heifers back over here, and here they are live in the flesh today. This is cow 2033. We've had 19, Don, is that right so far? 19 head, and so we've not run any analysis yet. I just put this together yesterday. If we look at across our treatments, again, our control, trenbolone acetate with estrogen or with Zeranol, our birth weights range from 68 to 76 pounds. So we're not having any of these giant calves or some of these mongoloid calves or anything like that. Correct, Don? I mean, and I looked across the data, there's really no differences. It's true. So look at even a skewed point here. If you start to look at, if you're like me and you start to peel the data apart and really say, what's going on here, male versus female, I don't want to, the inference here, you start to look at males, there's 2, 4, there's 6, versus the rest are females. I don't know if that has anything to do with anything, but we have just a small data set, and it's just small enough to be dangerous, so I don't want to say anything else about that. But birth weights look similar across treatments. Pulling, those animals that had to be pulled or assisted during calving are similar across treatments. And so ideally, this is a heifer out of trenbolone acetate and estradiol. So she got both her mom, this cow, one-time treatment of both androgen and estrogen way back when. Here's the offspring. So ideally, and Don and I have talked about this, and I'm going to put him on the spot, we're going to continue to look at these heifers, I hope, long term. Have we changed this young lady? Have we done anything with her? There's a lot of interesting data out of Montana right now that indicates animals that are treated differently, maybe limit fed, during times of development. Those are animals that are nutrient restricted and their dams are nutrient restricted. The longevity on those animals are much longer. So if you restrict that heifer when she's weaned, or you restrict mom when the calf's in utero, that calf that comes out of that restricted dam is actually more resilient during times of drought, during times of limited nutrients. And so that's the kind of animals we would want, because anytime we may not have a drought, but we may have limited nutrients, those kind of things. So our plans in the future is to look at these heifers, look at any of these offspring, to see if we've altered that with that one-time application of either an androgen or an estrogen implant. So in summary, our low-weight replacement beef heifers treated with trenbolone acetate and estradiol had greater body weight change. Remember, 384 pounds over that 220-day period. All right? Consequently, showed you those bar graphs that indicated those heifers had increased average daily gain. Makes sense. If we're going to take advantage of that weight gain, trenbolone acetate and estradiol seems to be working pretty good on those heifers. Reproductive development, or that reproductive tract score, remember, was delayed in Zeranol. At day 106, we had less heifers that were in that cyclic group. Estrus behavior was actually altered by trenbolone acetate, had more mounts with those heifers that received trenbolone acetate. So we were altering growth and we were altering reproduction. Implications, use of these implants that could increase growth of those heifers without jeopardizing fertility would obviously be economically feasible for beef producers. Strategic replacement heifer production is needed, obviously, to meet our demands. We talked about that initially. But too expensive. Finding a source is difficult. Finding enough heifers that you like, the right kind of heifers, is difficult right now. So some recommendations, and I want to leave you with this slide. Replacement heifers that are identified early in life should not be implanted. All right? If you know without a shadow of a doubt that that heifer, you want to keep her on your place forever, I wouldn't mess with it. I would not implant that heifer. Don't think it's worth the risk. It's obviously off-label, unless you're using Zeranol. You can get some added weight gain on that. Heifers that are destined for finishing, treat them as a feed yard steer. Treat them as a feed yard heifer. Implant them. Get that added average daily gain. We showed that trenbolone acetate and estrogen was that best implant for those heifers. If you're not certain, you've got a group of heifers out there and you're not certain, and you're wanting to look at some different options, once you implant them with a heifer, once you implant them with an implant that is for feed yards, they no longer become a replacement heifer. They're a feed yard heifer. All right, remember that. So heifers that are not yet identified as replacement heifers can be implanted once, as we showed, if the label directions are carefully followed. So that Zeranol was our closest implant that was actually labeled for replacement heifers. The other two are not labeled for replacement heifers. Implant according to manufacturer's recommendations. The manufacturer's recommendations should always be followed, should have minimal effects on reproduction. Again, our pregnancy rate was similar across treatments, but if you start to look at those numbers and you start to think, what if we had 100 per treatment group or 200 per treatment group, would those differences remain, and would we see a difference in pregnancy rate? It's possible. So we've shed some light on how those implants, how the steroids are impacting the reproductive performance. And one thing that, again, these are our final recommendations, is that if you've identified that heifer that you want to keep on the place, I would not implant her. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll be happy to answer questions. And Tom Devine is back there to help answer any questions that I may stumble on. Thank you very much.